Here is the Week 1 recap. I made a separate video on what happened in this game. Bottom line, season opener, Kelce hyperextended his knee 2 days before the game. Chris Jones had a contract issue for the Chiefs, and as a result, both of them were in street clothes for Week 1. Kelce was on the sideline and Chris Jones was watching from the stands. The Detroit offense and defense looked shaky at first, but they found their footing. It was surprisingly a close game. Something looked off with the Chiefs' offense. Patrick Mahomes looked uncomfortable with his tight end sidelined. The O-line looked like it was crumbling. Kadarius Toney left his hands at home, and the Chiefs' defense put up a great effort but couldn't hold the Lions. The Lions' D-line, or their pass rush, looked better and better as the game progressed. David Montgomery looked like he was the Lions' RB1. I guess they really didn't want to use Jahmyr Gibbs too much. Josh Reynolds did well, and ARSB or Amon-Ra St. Brown had a touchdown. Close game, but the Lions eked out the win 21-20. This was Week 1 for both of these teams, but it wasn't necessarily the game of the week. This was not a quarterback game. Both young quarterbacks, Desmond Ridder and Bryce Young, had underwhelming performances. Kyle Pitts was the receiving leader for both of these teams, if you can even say that. He was also pretty underwhelming. For the Panthers, Hayden Hurst scored the only touchdown and Eddie Pinheiro kicked a field goal. The running game is what got it done for the Falcons. Tyler Algier, I think it is, not Alegi. I think I said Alegi in a past video. It's Tyler Algier, scored 2 rushing touchdowns, and Bijan Robinson, the rookie, also scored a touchdown. Bijan Robinson was also a first-round fantasy pick, and if he builds on his Week 1 performance, he can be one of the scarier running backs in the league. The Falcons beat the Panthers 24-10. This was a weird game. The Bengals were a complete mess. Joe Burrow was questionable for Week 1 because of a strained calf he attained in training camp, but he was on the field. However, the Bengals' offense crumbled. Evan McPherson, or Shooter McPherson's field goal, was the only points the Bengals could muster. Yes, that's right. The Bengals were that bad. I guess Burrow targeted Jamar Chase a couple of times, but T. Higgins didn't record a catch. The other Joe Mixon, was the only player on the Bengals' offense that was sort of functional. Now the Browns weren't looking their best either. Chubb had 106 yards on the ground, and Deshaun Watson scored a rushing touchdown. Harrison Bryant had a touchdown, too. Final Browns 24, Bengals 3. No need to be too worried about the Bengals because they lost their first 2 starts last year, and they made the playoffs last year, too. If Chubb can keep it up, he could be the best running back in the league. I can sum it up really quickly. Anthony Richardson, Michael Pittman, and a defensive touchdown by DeForest Buckner were all the scoring that the Colts could muster. From this game, we can see that Richardson can really use his legs, and he quickly developed chemistry with his receivers, especially Michael Pittman. The Colts also had a fumble 6. The Jags thought the play was dead, and DeForest Buckner quickly scooped up the ball and scored a touchdown for the Colts. And that was it for them. The Jags also scored a couple times. Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones, Tank Bigsby, and Travis Etienne all scored touchdowns. Both Richardson and Lawrence were fairly good. They did both throw interceptions, but it was a good game, but Lawrence had a better game. Jaguars 31, Colts 21. Kirk Cousins was pretty efficient. Not perfect, though. He threw for 344 yards. Jordan Addison caught a touchdown, and Alexander Mattison also caught a touchdown. Greg Joseph kicked a field goal. Okay, let's talk about the Buccaneers. Just kidding. Justin Jefferson caught 9 of his 12 targets for 150 yards. He had a great game. He didn't score a touchdown, though. TJ Hawkinson also caught 8 of his 9 targets for 35 yards. He also didn't score a touchdown. At the end of the day, the Vikings defense couldn't really stop Baker Mayfield. And they couldn't really stop his receivers lining up next to him either. Mike Evans and Trey Palmer both caught touchdowns. Rachaad White technically led all RBs in that game in rushing yards, but he had a pretty underwhelming game. Madison didn't have a good rushing numbers either, but he did score a touchdown. McLaughlin, the Tampa Bay kicker, completed 2 field goal attempts. One at the beginning of the game and one at the end of the game. It was the game-winning field goal. 20-17, Buccaneers won against the Vikings. This was a better game than the Falcons versus Panthers game, but still a pretty unspectacular game. Derrick Henry did what Derrick Henry does, but All of the Titans' points came off the leg of Nick Folk. Derek Carr threw for 305 yards and a touchdown to Rashid Shaheed. Tannehill threw for 198 yards and 3 interceptions. It was a pretty poor outing for Tannehill. Blake Grupe, the new Saints kicker, converted 3 field goals and an extra point in his debut. Jamal Williams, who was filling in for the suspended Alvin Kamara, he was okay. He was decent. Nothing too spectacular. He rushed for 45 yards on 18 carries. Chris Olave had a pretty amazing game. He caught 8 out of his 10 targets for over 100 yards. Michael Thomas looked like a flex option, 5 catches, 61 yards. I'm saying he looked like a flex option in PPR leagues, of course. DeAndre Hopkins, of course, led the Titans in receptions and reception yards. 7 catches for 65 yards. Mainly a field goal game with Carr, Olave, Hopkins, and Henry. Also Michael Thomas, the only players that got it going a little bit. The Saints took a close one, 16-15. Pickett was pretty bad in this one. He only threw 1 touchdown to Pat Freiermuth, the Steelers' tight end. Other than that, it was all 49ers. Christian McCaffrey scored a highlight reel touchdown. He ended the night with 1 touchdown and 152 rushing yards. He'll be a stud if he can stay healthy. Brandon Ayuk caught 2 touchdowns and also had 129 receiving yards. A splendid game. Jake Moody also had 3 completed field goal attempts. Bottom line, the 49ers blew the Steelers out of the water 30-7. Everyone expected Lamar to dominate, including me. The run game dominated the touchdown game. They didn't dominate the actual running game because Lamar led everyone in rushing yards with 38 rushing yards, and that includes Dameon Pierce and the Texans. Lamar threw for 169 yards and had 1 interception and 1 fumble. Justice Hill scored 2 touchdowns and J.K. Dobbins scored once. Good news for J.K. Dobbins. Dobbins tore his ACL late in the 2020 season. He missed all of 2021, and he missed all but 8 games in 2022. He made it out of his first game untouched. Yay! Oh, well, okay. Well, at least we hoped he would make it out untouched. Yeah. J.K. Dobbins has been diagnosed with a torn Achilles and is out for the remainder of the season. He just can't catch a break. Justin Tucker scored 3 field goals. C.J. Stroud, who made his NFL debut, surprisingly had a better game than Lamar. He threw for 242 passing yards to his main receiver, Nico Collins, and he also got Tank Dell involved too. The Texans' only points came from the leg of Ka'imi Fairbairn. He scored 3 field goals. Dameon Pierce had a disappointing game. Final score 25-9, the Ravens took it. It's week 1 and Justin Fields, the breakout candidate, is already off to a bad start. He fumbled and threw an interception. He did throw 1 touchdown to Darnell Mooney. Also, Rashawn Johnson scored a touchdown. Cairo Santos scored a couple of field goals, but that's it. It was all Packers. Aaron Jones scored a rushing and receiving touchdown, and Romeo Doubs scored 2 touchdowns as well. Also, the Draymond Green of the NFL, Quay Walker, scored a touchdown. On defense, of course. I call him the Draymond Green of the NFL because he got ejected the most in a game that's hard to get thrown out of. Jordan Love was pretty solid. It was not close. 38-20, Packers take the dub. Pretty uneventful game. It was close, though. In Jimmy Garoppolo's Raiders debut, Jacoby Myers scored a touchdown. Scratch that. He scored 2 touchdowns. And Daniel Carlson scored a field goal. Russell Wilson threw for a couple of touchdowns as well. L.J. Humphrey and Cortland Sutton. Will Lutz also scored a field goal, but Lutz probably cost the Broncos the game because he missed the extra point that could have at least sent the Broncos to overtime. Devontae Adams did okay, and Javonte Williams led all running backs in rushing yards. It was a close one, 17-16. Raiders won. Jalen Hurts was not his solid self. Devonta Smith scored a touchdown, A.J. Brown had a decent enough game. Dallas Goedert didn't record a catch, and Kenneth Gainwell led the backfield for the Eagles. The big story for the Eagles was Jake Elliott, making 5 field goals en route to the 25-20 win. Mac Jones was pretty solid, going over 300 yards. Hunter Henry had a touchdown, big game for him, and Kendrick Bourne had 2 touchdowns. The Eagles are not playing their best football, and we'll have to see if that changes in Week 2. The Chargers versus Dolphins game was a shootout, quite literally. For the Chargers, Justin Herbert had a great game. Austin Eckler had a great game. I think he had a touchdown too. His backfield mate Joshua Kelly scored a touchdown. Mike Williams had a decent enough game, and Keenan Allen had a better game than Mike Williams. For the Dolphins, Tua Tagovailoa looked like he was the best quarterback in the game, putting up video game-like numbers. Tyreek Hill was by far the best receiver in the league in Week 1. Raheem Mostert, who I guess is the lead back for now because Jeff Wilson is on the IR, had a touchdown and a modest smash-mouth and ground-pound game. It was a shootout that could have gone either way, but it went the way of the Dolphins. Final score 36-34. I was actually a little bit surprised about this game. I said before that the Rams might have a rebuilding season. Whatever they will or will not have, they're off to a great start, beating a loaded offense. I had some questions on how good the Seahawks defense was going to be, and it looks like they're off to a rough start. They couldn't defeat a Rams team without Cooper Kupp. Matthew Stafford led all QBs in passing yards that game with 334 passing yards. Kyren Williams looked like he was a potential RB1 in fantasy, scoring two touchdowns and a crucial waiver wire pickup. I have no idea why the Rams are not running the football to Akers, but I guess they found a more permanent running back for their squad in Kyren Williams. Tutu Atwell and Puka Nacua had insane games. For the Seahawks, DK Metcalf found the back of the end zone, and Kenneth Walker had a modest game. The Rams pulled off an upset by a large margin, 30-13. Sunday Night Football, this game was really bizarre. The Cowboys started the game by blocking a field goal attempt by Giants kicker Graham Gano, and they took it to the house. Then Saquon Barkley fumbled, and the Cowboys house called that too. The Saquon fumble was surprisingly not the only fumble the Giants coughed up that game. It was fumble, sack, and interception city at MetLife Stadium for Dallas. Graham Gano tried another field goal attempt and he missed that. Daniel Jones really couldn't get anything going. But Dak Prescott didn't really have a great passing game either. It might have been raining, so that's why it was a ground and pound game, but Tony Pollard was the player that carried the Cowboys offense in Week 1. He had 2 touchdowns and ran for 70 yards. CeeDee Lamb also had a modest night, but the Dallas defense was the story of the night. When I checked one of my fantasy teams, the Dallas defense had like 35 points. You notice how I haven't mentioned anything about the Giants players scoring touchdowns or Graham Gano scoring field goals? Well, yeah. The Giants put up a big goose egg. The final score, Dallas crushed the Giants 40-0. One of the worst Sunday Night Football games, in my opinion. Monday Night Football. Going into Week 1, there was hype for players like Garrett Wilson, and the whole Jets offense was hyped up because of the new guy under center. He isn't technically new because he's a veteran. For those who live under a rock, the new Jets quarterback was Aaron Rodgers. He actually had a decent night. He made it through the game and was a little banged up. Okay, actually, he didn't make it through the entire game, but he at least made it through the first half. Actually, he couldn't make it through the first half. He actually didn't make it through the first quarter, nor did he make it through the first drive. But seriously, he didn't make it past the first 4 plays that the Jets ran. Yeah, a little banged up, very banged up. Rodgers is set to miss the rest of the season with a devastating injury, an Achilles tear that will most likely end his season and probably end his legacy. He said that he might recover and be able to play towards the end of the season, but who knows? Zach Wilson took over after the first drive and surprisingly beat the Bills soundly. Ha, just kidding. They actually beat the Bills by 1 touchdown, and that came from special teams. Yeah, having Zach Wilson is going to sting because he played like hot garbage last year, and I don't see why he wouldn't do the same thing this year. Well, the Jets are going to make it to the Super Bowl, and they're going to make it to the playoffs. Well, that aged well. You know what also aged well? Dalvin Cook is going to lead the backfield in Week 1, and Breece Hall is going to be fantasy relevant. I'll tell you, Hall picked up right where he left off. 127 rushing yards on 10 carries. He is someone to look forward to because Dalvin Cook might be the Jets' RB2 and barely a flex option in fantasy for now on. Now, the Bills actually didn't play great. Okay, James Cook and Stephon Diggs had great games, and the defense to some extent had a great game. But I can't really say that Josh Allen had a great game. It was a surprising outing for the elite quarterback who threw for 236 yards, 1 touchdown, and 3 interceptions. He also lost a fumble. It was a tough L to take for the Bills and Josh Allen, but fantasy managers shouldn't panic because he should rebound in Week 2. This Monday Night Football game was far better than the Sunday Night Football game. I mean, far better. Like and subscribe for more fantasy content. If you like this video, share this video with your family and friends.